Yeah, on.
Two twins. Hey, yeah. Ow. Yeah. The not to be confused with the yeahs. Whatever happened to the yeahs? I thought they were a great band. I like Karen O. I like the sort of nerdy guy with the glasses, the drummer, and that sort of like pre-hipster, cool, creative guitar player. I thought they were kind of awesome. What happened to those guys?
The yeahs. I never got into them like you did. I remember the name Karen O. And I remember they had a record that you loved. I can't remember.
Well, they had a couple. And I think that they tried to like turn her into a solo thing ish. Like that was the game plan for her. And then it kind of didn't go as planned. I don't know. They were in this weird, sort of mid 2000s time period where things were really going pop. In fact, I remember they started out as a real stripped down, kind of thing. And then by the end, they were like doing pop records, So we'll shift away from that. That's our yeah segment. Which was not exactly planned.
Check back in with us for episode 246.
Yeah, where we'll be dissecting the IAS entire catalog. But pivoting to our featured group here on episode 51, we're on 5-1, buddy. Almost feels like we're starting a new era, starting a new chapter, even though we're not. It's the same bozos, same deal on the deal here, right? We're not doing anything special
on the deal here.
But an important band, I think, we can agree, a band that we probably didn't anticipate taking 51 episodes to get to. But listen, Frankie Goes to Hollywood's important. I mean, we, you want to make sure you chip off all the important groups before you get to Tool, I think, right?
No doubt. Frankie Goes to Hollywood is important. And T, just relax, man.
Yeah, you better. All right. Well, why don't we relax even further here and get into our round and round. Nubs, now that you've really loosened up, why don't you give us what you've been listening to lately as far as the long play format? What do you got, bud?
I've been listening to an album I really want you to check out, and a band that is so underrated, and that is the band Ocean Size. And I think it was their second album.
Well, I assume they're named after the Jane's Addiction song, so I'm already kind of on board.
Probably. Their second album was FLRS, and every album they've done has been fantastic. They're kind of a modern prog 2000s sort of deal with, kind of like shearing guitars, and just everything's really big and thoughtful. They're just an awesome band, and you should check them out. Everybody should check them out. They're really, really, really good. I don't think they're together anymore, unfortunately, like all great bands. But I've been listening to that one a lot, and for good reason. Also, the first album by Iona, another prog kind of Celtic band that I was able to see when they were still around. And I scored a copy of their very first album, which is awesome. They have a guitarist named Dave Bainbridge, who's, again, underrated is the theme today. I mean, he's like one of the most underrated guitarists, I think, in the world. And then lastly would be Ozzy Osbourne's Bark at the Moon, which was the first album without Randy Rhoads. This was with Jake E. Lee. It's very 80s. It's got a lot of synthesizer, which I love, of course, in Ozzy's music. And again, kind of an underrated Ozzy album. The production is incredibly 80s, especially the drum sound. But the title track is cool, and it's got some nice slower ballads, and it's just an Ozzy record. But one that, if you look at the whole Ozzy catalog, Bark at the Moon is not incredibly celebrated, but So 3 underrated aspects of some really outstanding music.
Did you pay, $900 for the Ozzy full studio colored vinyl box set that came out a couple years ago?
I did not. I know someone on this in this show who did.
What? Who?
All right, just since you brought it up, though, you're gonna be so pissed. Okay, are you ready?
Not really. Go ahead, though.
My copy of Bark at the Moon, which I acquired recently, is the Japanese import vinyl pressing with the Obi strip.
Of course.
It also comes with a set, and this is if you really find the Japanese pressing that's really sought after, you get the one that comes with a set of Ozzy tattoos.
Ooh.
So it's got insert Obi strip, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
The great vinyl. But as part of this special package for Japan, they did like a sheet of like 6 Ozzy Osbourne related tattoos.
So are you going to, use them? Are you going to apply them? Or are you going to just save them? Like what's the game plan on the Ozzy tattoos?
Definitely save them, though. It's a little tempting to use them, but yeah, I everyone's different as a collector. When I get anything that's collectible, I don't use it. Like I don't put posters on the wall. If a poster comes with an album, unless I have 2 or 3 of them.
Well, you're failing to tell everybody about the shirtless Phil Collins poster you have on your wall. So I actually disagree with that.
Yeah. So no, I don't plan on using the tattoo. Well, maybe you and I just get together, have a little Ozzy tattoo party and use them.
Yeah, I'd be down with that.
Yeah, exactly. T, what do you got for running around?
I've got 3 brand new albums, actually. It's been a good month or so for releases and trying to get caught up, but 3 of them that are kind of on the radar here lately are, the first is by the band AFI. And, AFI is kind of I don't know, I guess they're a emo thing, rock, punky. I don't know. I don't know exactly. They kind of fall into that. Certainly they've been part of the emo conversation. I mean, they've been around for like 20 years. So, but they've certainly created some longevity. I think their music is a bit more layered than just kind of whiny emo stuff. And it's a band I've always really liked. I love the singer's voice. And they have a brand new album called Bodies, which is quite good. I'm still kind of getting through it, but I think you like those guys a little bit too, Nub, right, over the years. And it's a good one to check out if you haven't yet.
I really liked that. They had a great 2-album run, which was Sing the Sorrow. Was that the name of the album?
Yeah, it sounds right. Song? Yeah.
And December Underground. That back to back that's the first one is the one that had Girls Not Grey on it, which I always thought was a great single.
Yeah.
But they kind of caught fire during those 2 albums. And then I haven't kept up with them since the way that you have, but it's a great band to be into, man, for sure.
Yeah, that's one of those Interscope Jerry Finn efforts was December Underground. Really good album. The second is a band we haven't heard from in a bit, and that's Modest Mouse. Although Brendan Bayless obviously has heard of them.
His man crush.
I know. I'm a little jealous of Isaac Brock on that one. But
not to be confused with your man crush, who is Brendan Bayless.
Yeah, that's right. The man himself. This album is called The Golden Casket. I'm still digging into it, but sounds pretty good. They haven't gone festival rock, which is good. I think Isaac's better than that. I don't think we'll see that from him, but it is layered and creative and has some lushness to it. And so far I like it. And the third is from one of my favorite bands going way back. These are all bands that go way back. And this is the band James out of the UK. And the album is called All the Colors of You. So 3 new releases, but from 3 bands that have been around for some time. And boy, are we about to talk about a band that has also been around for some time. These guys actually got, I think it was technically the late 80s, very, very late 80s when they got together. And obviously, a band that has really evolved since their formation, since their early recordings, into a true prog metal, project to say the least, but one that's extremely creative, extremely interesting, and I think a pretty important band all in all, Nub, not just in their musical output, but in their artistic output and in their way of always doing things their way. And sometimes that's for better or for worse, right? These guys are not without their idiosyncrasies, I think, as a group.
Head case moments. I'll say it more bluntly.
And moments where, they've done things that are a bit more non-traditional in terms of a commercial band, but they have found a way to do this in a way that's completely on their terms, but has also been extremely successful and extremely lucrative and very genuine along the way. You just don't see a lot of that anymore. And certainly these bands that were big in the 90s that have found ways to create longevity, you're often seeing them do so because they are pivoting into a, overtly commercial direction. I think of like Weezer gone festival rock, or, these bands that have found ways to kind of either reemerge or stick around or sustain this success. And oftentimes they're having to change what they are. Well, these guys have really certainly not changed what they are over time. And there's something to be said for that, Nub.
I'll try and sum it up like this. Tool has been extremely good for the music industry. Extremely good. And just as much so in 2020, in 2021, as it was in 1996, right? So Tool has been extremely good for the music industry. It's taught lessons. It's been a leader. It's, been exceptional in a number of ways. Tool has not always been good for Tool. And Tool has not always been good for its fans. And that has to do with the overthought, the taking multiple years to make albums. But then even little things on top of that go the other direction, like all of a sudden now being a band that plays, arenas and charges almost obscenely high amounts of money for a ticket.
They are capitalists. There's no question about it.
Is it worth it to see them? Yeah, because they're that amazing. It's just frustrating that they don't do more. And frustrating that, Maynard spends his time on these side projects that kind of suck,
Yeah.
Perfect Circle was great at first. I mean, that first Perfect Circle album was terrific. And they haven't been half as good since, and aside from that Pussifer and a lot of this other crap, it's like, you guys are getting up there in age. Can you put a little bit more into Tool? So, and even though I think they believe very strongly in what they do and how they do it, I think in the last few years, there've been some things that have made me feel a little more uneasy about the band. That's for sure.
Well, let's rewind back to a time where you probably, were okay with just about everything that this band was doing, and talk about tonight's album. And let's dig into it on the Nerdy Deets. Done dirt cheap. Heyo.
You want some dirty deeds? Yeah. You want some dirty deeds?
All right. Lateralus was released on May 15th, 2001. Hey, happy birthday, Dad. Right? May 15th.
Oh, yeah. Happy birthday, Dad.
That's right. And that's the day after Mrs. Toph's birthday. So, happy birthday to her, too.
Oh, that's right.
So
I'm sure Mrs. Toph bought Lateralus for her, what would that be, like a 23rd birthday or something like that?
Yeah. Unlikely. Probably went out and got some Broadway soundtrack instead.
Yeah, exactly.
So 6 months before 9/11, this is Tool's third studio album. Now, they did have an EP in there as well called Opiate, which certainly part of their early work, but this was really their third major label effort. Notable that this was also produced by David Bottrell, who also produced Anima. So some familiarity there. Bottrell is obviously a pretty renowned rock producer. He did all the sort of modern Peter Gabriel work. He produced a couple of King Crimson, this 90s Crimson outfit. He produced a couple of their records. And then more notably, an album that I know we both love, that's Diorama by Silverchair, and some of that later work by that band. And obviously Diorama is a production masterpiece in a lot of ways. So
he also did like the End of All Things to Come by Mudvayne. I mean, he was pretty hot during this time.
Yeah, no question. And obviously a guy that when it came to putting together a rather dynamic rock album, knew exactly what he was doing. The record is 79 minutes long. I think that's as long as a compact disc allowed at the time. So obviously, and there's a couple of noise junkers, as you often get with Tool records. We won't talk a lot about those today, but aside from that, you're getting a good solid length of music here, as you often do from these guys. This was on Volcano Records. Nubs, who are the two other notable artists on? You've been so bad at trivia the last couple episodes. Let's see if you can nail this one. Let's see if you can. Let's see if you can spot this one. Who are the two notable bands off of Volcano Records?
I'm pretty sure Veruca Salt was.
Could have been.
But they're not notable enough. Okay. Yeah. And I could be wrong about that for sure.
Yeah.
Volcano Records. 311?
Yes, sir. 311 is one of them. Very nice.
And
Nubs, the second one is Weird Al Yankovic. So,
my thought was Failure, but they were on Slash, right?
Failure was on Slash. Yeah, that's right. That's
Weird Al Yankovic.
Remember in Naked Gun when he's like, oh, Weird Al Yankovic is here, and that's when Frank Drebin thinks the crowd is going nuts for him, and he has that quick cameo where he's like waving and signing autographs and stuff.
Great Naked Gun humor on that scene. That's awesome.
Oh, yeah. Movie's amazing. Kind of rediscovered a real love for Frank Drebin and all that. It's that was a good run. This debuted, to your point, Nubs, on commercial success, which this certainly had. This debuted number 1 on Billboard and sold over 500,000 copies in its first week. It was a real evolutionary point for the band creatively. So to couple that with this commercial success, and obviously, with the exception of Schism, there weren't really any other hits on the record. Now, Schism was a huge single. No question, got a lot of radio airplay, and it was a song that really captured at the right time a more commercial radio friendly audience. That song actually won a Grammy for best metal performance. They didn't even have to give the Grammy back now. They were able to keep it. So, and I don't know what this is worth, Nub, but the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame did a definitive 200 list of albums for whatever it's worth, and Lateralus was ranked 123rd on that list. And there's something to be said for that, I guess.
I don't know. It means jack shit to me for an organization that it took. How long did it take them to get Rush in there? Like 20 years or something?
yeah, too long. Yeah. Way too long. This was an interesting time. Obviously, this was when Napster was in full effect, and Tool, and they've always had a sense of humor about what they do. They actually announced a fake album with a bunch of fake song titles, and a bunch of people on Napster started creating these phony files of these Tool song titles that they had released, and people were posting them and downloading them. And I don't know if they did that just to screw with everybody, but it was kind of in today's world, you release an album and you don't even have to do anything. It shows up on your Spotify or your Amazon Music subscription or whatever it is. This was back in the day where, people were trying to get their mitts on these songs early and ended up getting duped by the band, weeks before the release with all these phony song titles that they released, which is kind of funny and very Maynard and very Tool. This changed the entire presentation of the band in terms of their prog approach and in terms of, in a lot of ways, their live presentation. Now, we had seen them, prior to this in a more stripped down fashion, but this, I think, was the point where the band really created their longevity. Anima was a great record that had come out 5 years before. And remember at this time, it was like, oh my God, they went 5 years, like, damn. And then they went another 5 years before 10,000 Days. And then they went like 13 years before Fear Inoculum, which came out a couple of years ago. So, we all were thinking at this time that 5 years was an eternity to go without a new record. And, obviously they've in typical Tool fashion proved that they can go even longer if we let them. And
it's a good point, because even the distance between Undertow and Anima was felt long. Remember, that was very long away. And what was that? 3 years or 4 years? Yeah,
it was like 3 years. And you're right. At that time, that was a pretty long while. Typically, if you were if you were a top band and a top seller, you were releasing a record every 2 years. You'd release the album, you'd tour, and then you'd record. So definitely a unique approach here of taking their time in the studio. And when you kind of get a feel for the complexity and the intricacy of the material, it makes sense. You can't whip up an album like Lateralus in 6 months. It takes time to compose, to perform, and to record. Another thing you really heard come on in Lateralus is sort of the emergence of, and Danny Carey had always had a pretty strong influence on the band. And obviously, he was a strong point of the group from the very beginning, even going back to Opiate and Undertow. But in terms of, turning things into a real experiment related to time signatures and sort of tribal rhythms and these sorts of things, Danny Carey obviously, really made his mark on this record, as did the bass player, Justin Chancellor. You can really hear on Lateralus, he starts to take lead on a lot of the riffing, on a lot of the thematics within the songs. And very often with this band, the bass is providing the lead and the guitar is sort of filling in. The thing I've always loved about this band is it's a true group effort. I mean, without one piece of it, it either wouldn't be right or it wouldn't be the same. And that's really the case on every single song. You're not seeing trends where one piece is leading more than the other. And, there are some sequences and some moments where you're getting something really good from Adam, or you're getting something really good from Maynard, or certainly on this one from Chancellor and Danny, you're getting some good stuff in many moments, but it always feels like a collective. And that's got to be part of the approach of composition and development, where these guys were really, really thoughtful, at times heady. And of course, you've noted sort of the math element of a lot of this. It's a collection of very smart musicians that seemingly always end up on the same page, doesn't it, Nub?
Yeah, it does. And, get ready for the Justin Chancellor love fest, because I am just such a huge fan of him as an artist and the way he plays. But you get the vibe that Danny Carey is like the reason we still have Tool, because without Danny Carey, my thoughts are that, Maynard would be out like making wine, and Adam Jones would be like, running a graphic design firm. And
I think they're doing that anyway.
Right. Yeah.
But
and
right.
Justin Chancellor, be in Australia, playing bass for any band that wanted him. And Danny's probably the guy that says, hey guys, like maybe we should rehearse today or do some writing, or, it just feels like he's the anchor that kind of keeps the thing stable and makes things happen.
I think that's fair. And every member has kind of brought their own need to the band historically. One of the things that Adam Jones, the guitar player, always brought was sort of the artistic element in a lot of the kind of visual nature of things. He directed a couple of the music videos. I'm sure he had a hand in the album artwork in a few cases, but this artwork was actually developed by Alex Gray, and it's important in how unique it was at the time. This was, still at a time where you were getting a lot of just regular jewel cases, and you were getting, some of the cardboard sleeves. And this was, I think, as we were just coming off of some of the Digipack type ideas that were happening around that time. But Tool was always on the forefront of, album artwork, and still are. Even Fear Inoculum had some stuff that was pretty amazing. But
I just want to say how excited I am that you're talking about that.
Yeah, I know, but
yeah. After years of giving me so much grief about my obsession with album art and packaging, here we go.
Yeah, I knew I was putting this section together. I was like, all right, well, I know at least he'll like this one. But this they were using this transparent sort of film, almost plasticky material, providing the booklets and the liner notes. And things were meant to sort of line up different multiple sheets, because the whole concept visually around Lateralus is around sort of the body form, that colorful sort of transparent, human body form. And it's a pretty interesting and pretty wild piece when you go purchase it and you bring it home and you start sorting through it. It's like, whoa, this is pretty cool. And kind of goes hand in hand, the visual nature of it really goes hand in hand with the music properly. And they did that, with their most recent release, as I mentioned. They certainly did that with 10,000 Days. These guys have, and even Anima had kind of an interesting approach to the artwork and the liner notes and the tribute to Bill Hicks and all those. I mean, these were things.
Well, remember that the Anima had you did the animation. Remember, you'd move it, and you're right. They were breaking this ground before Lateralus. I mean, shit, 10,000 Days had a set of like goggles built into the
that's right.
sleeve, which by the way opened from the top and the bottom. So
right.
It's just, and it won't fit in any that the symbolism that I loved of the 10,000 Days packaging was it didn't fit in any storage unit. And then they took it a step further. Fear Inoculum it's got like literally a video inside of it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So yeah, they've always pushed it in some of the, most remarkable ways in rock music history.
Very much so. And even back in the Undertow days, I mean, their music videos and some of their visual treatments on stage, granted, it sort of evolved more as we got to this point, but they were always doing things from a visual standpoint, an artistic standpoint, and certainly an album artwork and packaging standpoint that were extremely unique. And Lateralus was a notable part of that. The last thing I'll touch on is something that we don't talk a lot about, which is lyrics. And there are probably a handful of artists where I actually do enjoy keying in on the lyrical content and who I feel really bring something that needs to be noticed and something that needs to be respected in terms of kind of the lyrical approach. So PFO, I know you'll appreciate this one, buddy. I'm always fascinated by the thematics of Maynard's lyrics. And I feel like every album does have its own tone. Now things are very abstract and, I don't know that there's a lot there that's coming across as deeply personal, but there are certainly some things that are being communicated in a metaphoric sense and in a abstract sense that I always find really interesting. And one of the things I always notice when you kind of look back at their catalog is every album kind of has its own kind of lyrical tone. And, Animas was one that was pretty, angry and pretty edgy and pretty graphic. And then we had Lateralus and 10,000 Days and Fear Inoculum, and you kind of get a sense for how things progressed from there. The thing I've always noticed, Nubs, and I'm not sure how much you've dug into it, but the music on Lateralus is very complex and rather dark, but the lyrical content is almost sort of hopeful. Like Maynard's really singing a lot about almost relationship type concepts and concepts around things being fairly optimistic and things being fairly hopeful. And it's over this sort of darker backdrop. Then, 5 years later, 10,000 Days came out, and musically that to me feels a little lighter. There are some moments that are a little bit more upbeat. There are some moments that are a little bit more sort of major keyed but the lyrics are freaking depressing, right? So I always feel like there are these dichotomies going on of, him wanting to, bring a certain lyrical tone that in some ways complements and in some ways almost artistically clashes in a very intentional way with what's being done musically. But I've always found that as intricate and complex and in some cases dark musically Lateralus can come across, that lyrically there's actually a lot of positivity I've found. Do you ever get that vibe, or do you dig into Maynard's lyrical approach much at all?
Well, like you, if there's any band that I pay a little bit of attention to on this topic, it's Tool, because I do think lyrically they're very interesting. I think it's an excellent observation. I would say that Anima is in the category of the 10,000 Days, where the music's a little brighter, but lyrically, it is so dark.
Oh yeah.
You know, I mean, and so I think you're right. I think that's been a theme, you know, from at least that point forward, where maybe that more dim the music, the brighter the lyrics, and, you know, vice versa. And that plays into the band's sense of irony, you know, and Tool's always been kind of one of the masters of using irony as a tool, pun intended, in terms of how they do their work, how they produce.
We were going to do it at some point, you know.
Yeah,
we were going to do it at some point.
Exactly. In terms of how their albums are produced, how they're designed, song structure, you know, the lyrics, everything has this really sneaky, slithering sense of humor running through it that you have to find, and you have to kind of look for it. That irony is certainly there in the exact traits that you are describing. So I like it. It's a good read.
Well said. Let's get to the wonder stories, buddy. Nub, let's have it. How did you become part of the Tool army, as they say?
Yeah. The one thing they have in common with Kiss, they both apparently have armies.
Right. Overpriced fan clubs that they call armies. Yeah.
As we referenced at the beginning, it can't be unnoticed when you talk about Tool to talk about commercial success. This is an MTV band, and people don't remember that because it's so long ago, but Tool got its start on MTV, and I learned of Tool on MTV. And it was like Headbangers Ball sort of stuff, you know, like Later Night playing the Sober video. That song was a video hit. It was a radio hit. The video was stunning. I think that was the first taste of Adam Jones' aesthetic. But that's how I got into Tool, man, was through the radio and MTV. And who would have ever thought that with this band? I mean, if there are any kids today who are into Tool and you tell them that you discovered them on MTV and the radio, they'd be like, huh? But it's the most incredible part of the Tool story, and my Tool story is just the way that commercial success boosted this band. So you knew them. You know, nowadays, this would be one of those bands that you discover and you have to sort of find. And so discovered them through mainstream outlets, went and saw them play a sold out show at the State Theater, as referenced on previous podcasts, the evening that you discovered Failure.
Right. I remember that one probably more for the Failure aspect than the Tool aspect, but it was a great show.
For sure. And then saw them again on Lollapalooza on Inema. And that was probably the moment for me where I was like, okay, this band is something really different because of the theatrics and just the way they hit the stage and the way that they sounded. I mean, that's the thing that has kept me coming back to Tool is this band live sounds so great.
Yeah, they do.
And the reason for that, we'll get into it when we look at the album too, is they really don't do a lot of overdubbing, and they're all able to play and reproduce exactly what they do. Now they use a lot of effects and pedals and like, you know, it's not like, I wouldn't call their music like, you know, pure in terms of the sonic aesthetic that they go for. And they reproduce live brilliantly what they do on the album. And that includes Maynard with his vocals. So that's the origins of it. And then just, you know, bought every album. The story of Inema is kind of cool because we bought that album on a school trip. We went to Washington, D.C. And that's where I bought the cassette and just listened to it over and over and over again. And the fascination for Tool built. The only thing that's gotten in the way of being a huge Tool fan is Tool. The fact that they've only put out 5 albums in 30 years. I mean, that's it. You know?
Yeah.
So a pretty simple wonder story for a very complex band, and been a huge fan since. And as most musicians and most music lovers, if you're not a soldier in the Tool army, you know, something probably ain't right. So I don't know. T, your wonder story can't be that different from that, but I know you've had a couple of unique experiences. So what do you got?
Well, I think I've mentioned it before, but what I remember about that State Theater show, besides of course Failure, was Maynard came out and the entire show, he just walked around in a circle, and it was not a big stage. The State Theater is not a big stage. And, you know, every now and again he'd stop when he had to yell or scream or whatever. But, you know, during instrumental sections, in between songs, while he was talking to the crowd, he just walked around in this circle. and I could still see it. You know, this was 1990. This would have been what, 1993 that we saw this.
Yeah,
94 maybe.
Maybe 94. Yeah, the album was 93. It could have been 94.
Yeah. And I remember, I don't know if you remember this part, but he came out and he said, you know, they played one or two songs and he said, all right, listen, we're going to do this really fast tonight because my favorite band, the Jesus Lizard, is playing St. Andrew's Hall a few blocks away. And I want to get this done and go see them. So, you know, so we're not going to screw around too much tonight. And, you know, this was like a band on its first tour, like still kind of climbing a little bit here, trying to get notoriety and those type of things. And I just remember that being so bold. It was like, wow, like that's pretty cool.
It was like painfully transparent.
Yeah. It's like, God,
and remember, you know, this is like a year out from Guns N' Roses and Metallica and all of the antics and ridiculousness of that tour. And that's what you expected from rock stars, not for a guy to get up and say, hey, by the way, like, you know, we're going to make this quick because my favorite band is playing down the street.
Right. Right. The first song I ever heard from Tool that really captured me was Opiate. And I was, this was my freshman year in high school and I was dating this older girl and she was like hot and cool and liked cool music and all that. And she popped in Opiate. And I remember like, it was a moment for me. You know, I've described a few different song moments, but that one was big for me. I remember hearing that and being like, I knew Sober and I knew, you know, I mean, at that point you kind of knew Prison Sex and some of these like Tool songs that were out and were popular, but hearing Opiate and realizing that this was something that they did before Undertow and that this was something that, you know, had this groove and this sort of pop sensibility to it. And it was like, oh man, these guys are, you know, these guys are for real. And then of course, you know, Anima came out and everything blew up. But that was kind of the first moment for me. And it couldn't have been that much before Anima was released, but it certainly was before where, you know, I really took notice of them as a band. The many live shows, I mean, I don't know if you've kept count. I've probably seen them 20 times, I would guess.
Tool?
Yeah.
20?
Yeah.
Oh, geez. I
from Undertow to now?
I didn't know they've been around that much. I think I've seen them like 5 times.
Okay. Well, and the thing that's always notable is, you know, what kind of Maynard you're about to see. And, you know, things now have gotten to the point where he doesn't do the character move as much. But I remember one year at a Lollapalooza, he came out and he was a preacher, you know, and he had a reverend collar on and he was like doing these preaching bits in between songs. They were actually really funny. One year he came out just completely covered in purple paint head to toe. And all he was wearing was boxer shorts. So he was all purple with white boxer shorts on. It was kind of amazing. He was like a construction worker at one point. He had like the reflective, whatever, safety vest and the hard hat and all that. I mean, you know, it's always
the farmer too. I don't know if you've ever seen
the
that.
Farmer. Yeah. I mean, so, you know, it's always kind of, there has always been, you used a good word, irony, but certainly a tongue in cheekness to this band. They really don't take themselves too seriously, and they could. I mean, they're good enough. They're heady enough. They're complicated enough, but they've always been, and I think this is part of what has created their longevity, is that they've always had a touch of humor in what they do. And while they've been pretentious in some ways, more, I think, in their approach and in their sort of band logistics, I don't think they've been pretentious in their attitude and in their presentation. One of the shows I'll always remember is on 10,000 Days. I was living in New York City at the time, and they were playing 2 nights at Carnegie Hall. And to your point about the way this band sounds, I mean, they sound incredible. They would sound incredible in a warehouse, let alone at a theater that's, you know, built for acoustics in that way. And I remember this was like early in the StubHub days. And I remember it's, the show sold out in 4 minutes or whatever. And I went on StubHub and paid $200 to sit up in the balcony and see them. And I remember being like, I was totally broke at the time. And I remember being like, oh my God, am I really going to spend $200 on a concert? And this was 2005 or 6.
And now that's cheaper than their face value.
Yeah. Now you're spending $200 to see everybody. So, and of course,
and you're spending $300 to see Tool.
Yeah, that's right. And if you go on StubHub, it's $1,000 rather than, so it really, made my tummy hurt for a few seconds that I had to pull the trigger on a $200 ticket. But, it was well worth it. And seeing that band at Carnegie Hall was pretty amazing. So Nubs, I was thinking that maybe before we get to the record, we just get in a quick top 5. I think these guys, while they've only put out a handful of albums, are top 5 worthy. What do you think?
I am into a top 5. The cool thing about the top 5 for Tool is that it's 5 songs, but it lasts 120 minutes.
Yeah, exactly right. Well, why don't we go back and forth? What do you got in your top 5, buddy?
So do you want to do, sometimes we do these random order, or you want to count down 5 to 1 with 1 being the best? What do you think?
Well, for these, mine's kind of more randomized. So,
is it? Okay.
But you can go in order if you'd like.
One thing that's important to you is that sometimes we try and ignore the album that we're looking at when we do the top 5s.
Yeah.
I can't do that with Tool.
I know. I've got a couple too. It's all good.
All right, cool. So for my number 5, I'm going to go with Vicarious, the opener off of 10,000 Days.
Yeah.
And any Tool song that just opens with Justin Chancellor doing something unique on the bass, interlocking with Adam Jones, it's going to be a good sign. And the album we're about to talk about is certainly a good example of that. But Vicarious to me is just a perfect Tool opener. It's got the kind of, winding intro with the interlocking rhythms. And then it opens up into some really dramatic lifts, and Maynard's voice is reaching some pretty fantastic heights. And I just love Vicarious. So that's my number 5. Well, let's just say that's my first one. How about that?
Well, and a nice connection to Lateralus in that Vicarious also features 5 beats per measure, which obviously we're going to talk a lot about today as we dig into the tracks. Mine, I unintentionally actually did put it in order. So I'll kind of go back in order with you. So for number 5, I have Pneuma, which is off Fear Inoculum. This was their most recent release and the second track on that record. And, this is a longer piece. It's like 11, 12 minute type of a deal. And I think easily the strongest point of Fear Inoculum, and certainly one of the better things that they've ever put together. But track 2 on their most recent album, Pneuma, is a top 5er for me. Just a ride, just one of those Tool songs where you just, you feel like you are getting off a roller coaster when you're done with it. And seeing it live is pretty incredible as well, as we got to about a year and a half ago when they came through Detroit. Nubs, what's number 4?
Number 4, all of these really could contend for my favorite Tool piece, and this one included, and that is Eulogy, second track off of Inema.
Yeah.
The intro is a little long. In fact, in my digital version of the song, I have to admit, and I don't like admitting this, but I created a little Nubs edit where I edited out maybe the first minute and a half of that intro.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I love it. It sets a mood.
See, I edited out all the junk tracks. Obviously that's an obvious move, but that's interesting. Okay.
It would have been just awesome for like 30 seconds, but I think it goes on for like a minute 40,
Yeah, it's pretty long.
And it does set a mood. And once the drums come in, then you're sort of into it. Right. But it may be just a little excessive on that, but Eulogy, again, a song with, a really memorable emotional tie to it. This is one where the lyrics play a huge role. No doubt about it. That's my second choice is Eulogy. T, what's your next?
That would certainly be an honorable mention choice for me. Definitely the song that I liked the best on Anima for many, many years. Mine is the aforementioned Opiate, and I already talked about it, so I'll throw it back to you, Nub. What's 3?
3 for me is going to be The Grudge, which we'll talk about very soon. It's easily one of my favorite Tool songs. And again, think about like opening tracks, like Tool, just the masters of how to open an album. Even Fear Inoculum, I love the opening title track to that record. But Stinkfist, Vicarious, The Grudge, And on Undertow, the opener, what was it?
Intolerance.
Intolerant. You know, they just really knew how to open a record, and The Grudge is a great example, but we'll talk about it very soon.
Indeed. My third comes off of 10,000 Days, and this is I guess I'm going to put it as one song, but it's the Wings for Marie 10,000 Days duo, which is kind of a part 1, part 2. I think it clocks in total around 18 minutes, 17 or 18 minutes when you listen to them collectively, which you kind of have to. You know, you can't really take those individually, but this is an incredible emotional piece. I mean, this is Maynard singing about his mother who had died a couple years before the record's release. And obviously there's a lot of lyrical content on 10,000 Days about this very special relationship you can tell that he had with his mom. And boy, it's a piece that gets me. I mean, it really does. Emotionally, musically, the energy of it, it has ebbs and flows, and it has, you know, variations and in tempos and volumes. And boy, I just think it's a really kind of masterful piece from those guys. Those first handful of tracks on 10,000 Days are really incredible, you know, and I think that this is one of the peak moments of it. So Nub, number 2.
I'm assuming that you're not done with 10,000 Days. That's my guess.
That's fair. Fair assumption. Go ahead.
Fair assumption. Number 2 for me is off 10,000 Days, and that is The Pot.
Oh, wow. Top 5. Okay.
Yeah. I love The Pot. It's like, sometimes you got to just be reminded Tool can like write a song.
Yep.
You know, and it's just like when prog bands write pop songs, there's something intriguing about it, intriguing enough to really pay attention. Just like if a pop band wrote a prog piece, you'd pay attention. So I like the fact that they stepped out of an album that's, you know, a lot of people would say Lateralus is their most prog metal. 10,000 Days is right there. You know, how do you say that that's far behind in that way?
Yeah. And you kind of need it at that point. I mean, if you think about the first 4 tracks of that album, you're like, you know, either like in tears or you're like, I mean, it's a pretty intense first 4 tracks on that record. And The Pot kind of levels it out a little bit, gives you a little bit of pop sensibility, some upbeatness, some nice groove. It's obviously a pretty clever, kind of humorous lyric. I feel like that, again, typical thoughtful Tool. They're kind of saying, boy, if we have one more intense song on this, we're just gonna destroy people. So, you know, I think it comes at a very important time on that record, and that's great that it makes your top 5.
But, you know, and it's always a thing where before we start thinking of The Pot as, you know, She Loves You, yeah. Like, this is still the song that goes, you know, dun 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 dun, and dun 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 dun. I mean, it's got some super proggy elements to it.
Exactly.
It feels poppy compared to your point, the rest of the album. But I love The Pot.
Well, anytime Tool goes 4/4, either on Lateralus or 10,000 Days or For Your Inoculum, you're like, wow, they really sold out in this section. You know?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
It's so rare that they go 4 beats per measure that, you know, it almost kind of startles you when it happens.
Totally.
Well, next on my list, number 2 is the title track for this album, Lateralus. So I'll leave it there.
Oh, I did not know.
Yes, sir.
Did not expect that. That's a real curveball, T.
Well, we'll get to it, so I won't dive into it too hard. What do you got as your number 1, Nubs? What's topping the list?
My number 1, and like all these, it could be, maybe with the exception of The Pot, it could be my number 1 Tool song, and that is Schism. And I don't care that it was on the radio, and like you can call it a hit, whatever, but it's an absolutely incredible piece of music.
Yeah.
And the way that the parts were put together, the composition of it showcases each of the band members in a very ideal way. It's got that Justin Chancellor bass thing going on the entire way. It's well paced. It's adventurous. It's emotional. It sounds amazing live. I mean, I would, you know, to the point of what we said on the last choice, this song reproduced live, and they play the video on the big screen behind them. It's stunning. It's absolutely stunning.
It's an experience. No question.
T, what is your numero uno?
Mine is Jambi, and that is
that's what I thought.
It's probably the one you saw coming for a bit, but you know, incredible song, incredible intricacies within a song that you can listen to every day and find something new, find something different. That's the beauty of Tool's music to me. Is it would be, some of the early stuff can get a little tiresome. I mean, there are certainly some tracks on Undertow and Anima where they can wear you out a little, but from Lateralus on, I don't think there's anything that you get sick of, because there's so much intricacy. There are so many things to take notice of. And I've always found that with John B. It's just, it's almost like I could listen to it right now and hear something new, or have something else to try and figure out in your head, or to try and figure out what they were doing from a timing standpoint or a rhythmic standpoint or whatever it may be. So it's
probably my number 6. It was on the list and it just barely didn't make it.
Yeah. Tough one. There are a lot of tough ones to leave off. 46 and 2 is hard to leave off. And another song from this record, The Patient, for me is a tough one to leave off. So
yeah, Hooker with a Penis was
Hooker with a Penis. It's like, these are really hard songs to not include in your top 5, but let's get away from the difficulty of a top 5 Tool list and into the record Lateralus. Let's put the needle on it, buddy. Well, you said it best, Nubs. These guys sure know how to start off an album, and obviously for a record like this, getting it off to not just a good start, but the appropriate start was likely especially important. And boy, they hit the right marks very often in their recording career. And I think they did so here as well with The Grudge. Now, Nubs, I don't think anyone should be expected to just play one section from a few of these songs. So there are going to be a few moments here where a few selections here where I'm going to just go ahead and give you, a couple of sections, because it's basically impossible. The Grudge is a very sectioned song, just like the other Tool selections. And here's another part that I wanted to play from the middle real quick. So it's always a little tricky with these guys because, obviously their song structure is typically non-traditional. We're not talking about a lot of verse, chorus, verse activity here, but those are kind of, I think, two of the highlight sections from The Grudge. Everything's based in 5. So we talked about it with Vicarious, and you see this trend throughout Lateralus in quite a few spots. Certainly in the first 2 tracks where it's all based in 5. Now, to the common ear, some people may notice this, some people may not. But, typically, pop songs or rock songs are in a, 4-beat measure, or they're in a waltz. So they're either in 4 and 3. Obviously, Nubs, 5 beats per measure is not unique to you and your ear being into a lot of prog music and these things. And this is not a new concept, the Yes and Genesis and plenty of other more experimental, sort of mathy prog rock bands, had been doing this for, a couple decades. But they really carved out kind of a niche here of utilizing 5s and 7s and 9s and some of these unique time signatures fairly often in their music. And they certainly get that off to a start here in the first 2 tracks on Lateralus, working within this range of 5s.
It's glad you played the second clip, and here's why. Do you remember when we were younger and we used to watch golf videos? It's fitting we're talking about golf because the you mean like the Muirfield Village highlight videos? Highlight videos and like the Jack Nicklaus videos. So there was a moment where Jack Nicklaus is talking about a hole at Augusta. I think it was, I don't know, on the front 9. I can't remember. But where he says, it is my favorite shot in all of golf. You and I have always
he's talking about Pebble Beach. There was a certain
Pebble Beach. Yeah.
And of course, you have to put your ball in the middle of the fairway to get to his favorite shot in all of golf. which I mean, most people can't do. So he's just like, yeah, this is my favorite shot in all of golf. All you have to do is hit a perfect drive.
Like
and you'll
bust
get
it 330 down the middle.
That's right. Yeah.
So, and he makes this big deal about it. And they put it up on the screen. My favorite shot in all of golf. That moment that you played in the second clip is my favorite moment in all of Tool.
Oh, wow.
When in The Grudge, when it all powers in, because they're teasing that riff. They are the masters. They are the masters of the tease and then the pull back and then the tease and the pull back and then the tease and then explode. They just build tension better than any band, I think, in rock history. And that's a great moment. You're just dying for what happens to happen. I love that moment. It's just the whole song comes in and like the album is officially started,
It's similar to Vicarious, which obviously would come 5 years later on 10,000 Days, but you get to the end of track 1 and you already feel like you've been in through a war. I mean, it's like, oh, that was only one song. I mean, because the outro of this is extremely powerful. It's a real kind of wow moment once this thing wraps up and you have those offbeat vocals and those kind of panting kind of noises that Maynard's making there toward the end that are offbeat. I mean, it's a tremendous track 1. And afterwards, you definitely feel like you've been kind of hit over the head. Now, track 2 eases into it, but man, you get a lot of intensity here as well. And another track that's sort of based in 5 as far as beats per measure and sort of the continued uniqueness there. And that is track 2, The Patient. So again, it kind of, you come off The Grudge and it's, eases you into it the first couple minutes. Boy, by this point though, you're you're obviously leaning into it pretty hard. Here's another section toward the back middle. So again, Nub, to your point, just building that tension and then sort of letting it loose. They loved playing this song live. And I don't know that it was one where, you'd consider it a fan favorite at their shows, but man, you could tell that the real Tool fans were very pleased to hear this one. I think it's a real high point of the album, and it can be argued that there are several, but playing with these offbeats and accents during the middle section, but it stays in 5 beats all throughout. Really good Danny Carey here. I mean, he's an interesting drummer, and I definitely want your take on it, Nub, but as the resident drummer on the old podcast here, of course, but he's not a groove machine. He's a little, when you watch him live, he's actually kind of herky jerky, but the power and the touch and the creativity is elite, within rock drummers, and a guy that probably doesn't get talked about enough or put in the proper category enough.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, he's doing a lot of the sounds. He's coordinating a lot of the sounds that people hear but don't know where it's coming from, using electronic drum pads and things like that. He does shine on this song. There's no question about it. And I think this is a standout track on Lateralus. It's maybe not quite as mathy as what we'll get later in the album. His groove is unique. It's there. I mean, he does play with groove. There's no doubt about it, but it's a different kind of groove. It just hits different beats in different ways. And he likes to mess with the listener quite a bit, especially in the middle of the measure. So in beats 2 and 4, he's always doing these weird things,
Where do you think he ranks all in all, Nub? I mean, if you were to really put him up there, I mean, do you think he's top tier? I mean, do you think he's elite?
He's definitely elite. There's no doubt about it. There's just some clubs in his bag that you've never seen. You got to see Neil Peart play standard rock songs early in Rush's career, and they'd sprinkle them in. And even later, you heard him more as a metal drummer. And then, of course, you heard him just master the prog element of being Rush's drummer. So it was nice to hear him do a lot and to master a lot. And that's probably a leg up that some of the greats have on Danny Carey's. You just kind of never heard him play simpler. I'm not sure if he could play Twist and Shout, the way that Ringo did. And that's part of being a drummer. I'm not sure that he could play a Foo Fighters song like Taylor Hawkins can in the same way. And I'm not saying that everyone needs to be all things. What I am saying is that what Danny Carey does is pretty narrow. It's very unique. And he's got his own voice as a drummer, which is all you ever want. But I think that voice could be a little too singular to truly call him one of the greats. But no doubt he's elite. No doubt.
Well, let's get to the smash single off Lateralus here with Schism. It's kind of impossible to just we're both just kind of sitting here, in front of our microphones. It's, I don't know if you found that difficult. I wanted to get up and break something. But
Yeah.
And by the way, Nub, who says that a waltz can't be a rock and roll hit? Huh?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. The waltz.
I mean, you don't, obviously, when you hear this, it doesn't scream waltz, but it is. It's in 3/4 route and threes and sixes, really throughout. So, and they were able to obviously make it the most commercial song on the entire record. It's sectioned out in a unique format. It is not a traditional song format. It's kind of more of this sort of trilogy structure, which you often get with these guys, but. And the section we just heard actually only happens once, but it's one of those areas where, again, just this thoughtfulness of not wanting to, even if you got something good, you don't want to overcook it or overhook it, right? You kind of put it in the spot where it treats the piece the way it needs to be treated, and then you leave it there. And at almost 7 minutes, though, Nubs, this was an impressive radio hit and a big song for the band. Just
incredible, mind blowing to think that this was not just on the radio, but a radio hit, right? It really is pretty incredible, but it's so well constructed. The beginning is captivating. The ending is very dramatic, but what's going on in the middle is it's the completion of the puzzle. Maestro, great job choosing the clip, because I think that's the most powerful part of the song. It's sort of the bridge, like you mentioned. I mean, how do you classify these sections? But, and the whole, again, lyrically, just this whole thing of the pieces fit, and that whole idea.
Yeah.
It ends up being catchy unintentionally so. And I think that's why Schism was a hit, because, lyrically it had some catchiness to it. You could sort of walk around and say, oh, pieces fit, and it's got that repeat thing going on near the end.
It's a very optimistic song lyrically. I kind of touched on it earlier. But it's this aggressive, intense musical piece. But yeah, that lyrically, at least what I'm gathering from it is that one that's, about sort of collaboration and about connections and about hopefulness. And it's interesting the way it kind of, almost butts heads with the piece musically. But I think that's part of what makes it all work. Well, we get to a two-parter here, and you saw this, fairly often with the band. But it's more of kind of a calm intro that then takes you into sort of the main track. So this is the shortest musical piece on the record, which really serves as an intro to the next one. This is Parable. So again, just something a little bit more on the calmer side. And obviously, when they played this live, and I think for most Tool fans, you would never really listen to one without the other, but it takes you into the second and sort of main section of this track, which is Parabola. Pretty classic sort of trademark Tool sound there. And it's a straightforward 4/4. So we talked earlier about how unusual sometimes that can sound when these guys go in a more traditional time signature, but unusual for the album that you're in a straightforward 4/4. It's the simplest song by far. I mean, this could have been on Undertow. This could have been on Anima. So I think Parabola is really kind of stripping things down to something that's a little bit more basic. Nub, what do you think of this one as far as the lead in of Parable, and then sort of this kind of driving, more simple nature of Parabola.
It's going to sound like a hot take, but it isn't. I actually like Parabole better than Parabola.
Oh, okay.
They could have extended Parabole into something that would have been more interesting. At Parabola, they insist on playing it live every time I've seen them since this album came out. And to me, it's a beer song.
Yeah.
I'm not a huge fan. And it's not because it's 4/4 and like a little bit simpler rhythmically. It's just because I really don't care for where it goes in what you might consider the chorus section when it kind of goes down. I mean, it builds and builds, and Adam Jones is doing that cool guitar thing, and then it just never takes off. It doesn't have that explosion that most Tool songs have. So this is, if we did a bottom 5 Tool songs, this would easily be in it. I'm just not a huge fan, and they insist on playing it live.
I'm kind of with you on that, actually. Yeah, I think. I think it's good. It's a little bit of a reset on the album. I think the Parable section, the quiet section, is actually pretty nice, and you sort of do need that. I mean, again, after The Grudge, The Patient, and Schism, you need to regroup a little bit, and they were always pretty good at that from a sequencing standpoint. It's okay. I think it's okay. I agree with you live. But, it takes you into a song that probably is anything but a beer song live. This is one that, hardcore Tool fans, you can tell, loved hearing live. And it's a song that, for a decent period of time, you were hearing fairly regularly with the unmistakable, drum intro from Danny Carey. And, I guess you could get a beer on this one. And the good news is you'd keep your head on your body, because typically this one literally will blow your head off your body when you see it live. It's pretty intense here with Ticks and Leeches. Yeah, this is just one. I remember we were at that show in Toledo at the was it like a minor league hockey arena or something in Toledo, Ohio, and they played Ticks and Leeches, and everyone just lost their minds. I mean, it's definitely one of those that always seemed like kind of a fan favorite, like a fan appreciated song that wasn't as, sort of mainstream for their more casual fans. But boy, the Tool army really unites when they pull out Ticks and Leeches live, and obviously, and it's some great drum work, particularly in the intro from Carey.
Sound wise, it to me, it's the lone throwback to like the Undertow sound, and obviously it explores more, proggy elements in terms of sections. But like the section you just played, that you could have told me that was off Undertow, and it's a little more thickly produced than the album Undertow, but still, it's the same idea. So every once in a while, the band would kind of revert back to some of its originality, not often, because they were always looking forward, but sometimes they just throw back to kind of where they started from. And that's what this song has always meant to me. I do remember when they played it in Toledo, and it was a blockbuster for sure. It definitely brought the house down. Luckily, our heads were still intact afterwards.
Yeah, we kept them on our body, but barely. Here's another one that they love playing live, and you can certainly see why. We're on the title track here, Lateralus. Spiral Out. Nubs, does this one cause you to spiral out when you hear it, or what do you think of the title track here? I think it's one of Tool's best songs.
Well, maybe now is the time to at least reference the Fibonacci sequence, right?
Yes, absolutely.
This is the song.
I thought you'd bring that up.
Yeah, this is the math. It's very Tool-like, and then it's also a little bit un-Tool-like to create such a formula, right? And to work around a formula, because clearly their music is not formulaic. But they came across this obscure mathematical deal which is called the Fibonacci sequence, and I don't know what it is. It's something to the extent of 1 1 1 3 3 5 7 7 8, whatever. And they followed that pattern when they wrote this song. So that this song, if you look at the measures and the beats and things like that, it follows this Fibonacci sequence, which kind of cool, kind of interesting, a little formulaic, and I think what they did around it though is cool. I mean, there are some great sections to this song. Have you ever seen them do this one live too?
Yeah, it's quite an experience live.
It is.
And,
it is.
And it's pretty intricate. I mean, the mainframe is sort of in a waltz, I think based on 6, and the verses are in 5. So you get a lot of differential here on, making kind of some of these unique time signatures work together. Even though they're in different sections, they still blend together in interesting ways. And it's a fairly simple song structure. This is as close to a sort of verse, chorus, verse type of an approach as you'll get on Lateralus, but obviously coupled with some very, very intricate, complex approaches to your point about the Fibonacci? I say that right?
That's how I'm saying it. Doesn't mean that it's right.
Yeah, must be Italian. Fragile must be Italian. We close out with the what is really kind of a trilogy here, and one that I'm interested to get your thoughts on. And so we'll take it kind of in all 3 parts. The first is disposition. Couple things that are notable here. I mean, obviously, again, you're coming off of Lateralus, which is a pretty intense song, and bringing things down a little bit here for part 1 of this, I think, trilogy of what you're getting here at the end. It's pretty calm. It's pretty short. This is 4.5 minutes. This is not meant to be something that's really drawn out. And I think what defines this ending trilogy of these 3 tracks is really you're getting into this tribal beat. And sort of this tribal vibe that obviously Carey was very interested in and brought to the table, and obviously had the skill set to do it. Chancellor's playing chords throughout the entire song. Adam's kind of working this digital delay, and Maynard is in his lower tier of vocals, very calm, more soothing kind of vocals. There's no screaming in this song. It's meant to be pretty atmospheric here on part 1 of this kind of 3-song run at the end.
They're playing with atmospheres here for sure. They're intentionally drawing things out. It's almost like with Lateralus, they were able to say, we showed the flash, we showed the skill. Now we can end the album on more of a mood setting idea. And it's very, very moody, the way they conclude the album for sure.
Yeah, indeed. Part 2 is the longest piece on the album. This is just over 11 minutes with Reflection. We'll hit you with 2 parts on this one. Obviously, there's some effects going on here, so they're getting into some kind of more layered stuff that that you didn't really need at a lot of points during the album. But obviously on this one, you're getting some of those keyboard and sort of digital layers within. Let's get to sort of toward the end of Reflection here. So it kind of picks up the steam there and has a great ending, great outro, really, really good guitar work from Adam Jones as it takes you to the end. This one has there's a lot of effects on Maynard's voice, which, he would do from time to time with the blowhorn and the distortion and some of those things. But really throughout all of Reflection, you could tell they wanted to give Maynard a certain vocal sort of vibe and treatment to kind of go along with this this sort of tribal sound and vibe, which, kind of continues from the previous track. What do you think of Reflection?
I really like the synthesizer use, the way that those kind of weave in and out of the song. And again, they pull those off live. I think Maynard has a box in front of him that sometimes he does some of those sound effects and noises with, which is very cool.
He does.
So, yeah. And I agree with you vocally. I've always liked when he plays with vocal effects too. I think that he, like everything Tool's done, it's always been tasteful. It's always been thoughtful. And there's always been a lot of intention behind it versus just trying to use it to cover up something or whatever. So, it's dangerous to say this is a prog guy. It's a little long just because it's not as adventurous as the previous stuff, but I do love the mood. I love the atmosphere. I love the drumming. it's kind of the right way to end it. I mean, you can't just end the album on like more just insane math rock, right? Like it's cool that they sort of teased out maybe what was to come in the future 2 albums later, because this sounds like something off Fear Inoculum. It really does to me. It's got that vibe to it. So
yeah. And it's the last track with Maynard's vocals, and it needs to be said. I mean, he has an incredible voice. I mean, in live, he sounds amazing. Yeah. I mean, this is not a studio hack here that can only scream and can only sing softly and can only be everywhere in between when in a studio setting. I mean, his vocals live, which do not demand a lot of treatments and those type of things, are really incredible. It's one of the great things about this band when you see him.
It is. He's an excellent singer, and he also makes a great $100 bottle of wine.
yeah, if you're lucky. Let's close it up with an instrumental here in part 3 to round out this trilogy at the end in Triad.
I get it. Triad. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3.
Right. Yeah, indeed. And obviously, you continue that tribal vibe that you're getting in the first 2 tracks and at the beginning of this one to just this big kind of climactic thing, which obviously we've noted the band was so good at. Here's kind of the way it rounds out at the end. Pretty sweet ending there. And Adam Jones really comes through in the last 2 songs here. I think Reflection and Triad is where you really see, him kind of step up, because really throughout the remainder of the album, it's the Danny and Chancellor show in many ways. So it's good to hear Adam kind of, come on strong there at the end. Really cool instrumental way, I think, to close this one out. Nubs, I don't know how many always make it all the way to Triad as they're plowing through Lateralus, and it's 79 minutes. But if you make it to the end there, it's a pretty satisfying way to close it.
It is extraordinary to think about this album being 79 minutes long. I mean, the work they put into it, the thought they put into it. Yes, it's a long journey, but it's so extensive. And I think the beauty of Lateralus is that for years you can discover it. You can hear things in it you never heard before. And just its sheer length allows for, how many opportunities do you really have to sit down for an hour and 20 minutes and listen to something top to bottom? So over time, the thing will age well naturally, right? Because there's so many things to explore. I'm way more familiar with the top half of the album than I am with the second half, but the second half, listening to it now almost feels like listening to a new album. And that's a good place to be,
Yep. All right, Nub, did it matter? Lateralus, what do you say?
Yeah, Lateralus definitely mattered. I think if we can bring the show back full circle, it was the last truly experimental thing to ever be this popular. I can't think of anything that's come out after that's gotten to this level. Now, you've had a few bands come out and do different things and seek some popularity, but nothing to the extent where it was played on mainstream radio and part of the sort of pop culture of the moment, like Tool was in the early 2000s. I love that. Even more than the album, I love the fact that the album was popular, which is ironic during an era where everyone, hated it when their favorite band got popular. I thought it was the coolest thing in the world when Tool got popular. You were sort of rooting them along because they did everything the right way and they didn't try to do anything commercial, which is exactly what made them commercial. And that's what's cool. If you can find success by being yourself in any avenue, you root for that. And so it mattered because it's the end of an era. It's the end of something this different being this popular. And so for that reason, it matters. T, what did it matter?
Yeah, I love, and we've talked about it with a few episodes here, but I love when bands evolve with a certain record and show you that they're here to stay with a certain record and do so in a way that's not, hey, we're here to stay because we're going to be ultra commercial, or we're here to stay because we're going to keep running the same play and executing the same formula, but we're here to stay because we're doing it our way. And I think Lateralus is just that. And the fact that they were able to couple doing it exactly the way they wanted to and needed to, and getting the benefit of commercial success and creative carte blanche for the end of time, which Tool will have, they accomplished it. I mean, this band has created an exceptional amount of demand. I mean, putting out records every 5 to 10 years and, all the things we've seen out of this band in the last, 25 years. One of the things that they've successfully done is they have created a loyalty and a demand for their approach and their material that's really unmatched. And I think Lateralus was a big turning point there of saying, hey, we could put out records like Anima all day if you want us to, but we're going to pivot to something that's more experimental, more proggy, and we're going to do it our way. And the fact that they were able to generate more respect and more demand from something like this, I think was a real signal to other bands at the time, to industry people at the time, to, make sure that you're giving bands creative room to do what they do, because it can work if it's genuine and it's true to their skill set and their kind of artistic need and expression. And you've created that loyalty and you've created that demand, it's going to work. And Lateralus certainly worked. And I think it worked for all those reasons. All right, Nub, where are we putting this one, buddy? On the final cut, on the turntable, in the collection, collecting dust, or are you putting Lateralus in the for sale bin? I don't know. What are you doing, bud?
Definitely not for sale bin. I've got a collecting dust just because of its sheer length, top to bottom. There's tracks on it that will live on forever.
Wow. Okay.
But I mean, listen, to pretend like I seek out top to bottom listens of this album for everything I just said, right? The beauty of the length is that it'll be long standing. The detriment of the length is that from a top to bottom album, am I listening to it frequently? No. And, do I feel like in a standard record collection, like, is this vital enough to be in there? I do, but it'd be collecting dust. I mean, I just, pulling it out, listening to it top to bottom is quite a task. But again, the tracks on it, the Schism, the Grudge, the Patient, like these things can and will always be listened to. But, Lateralus and in the back half of the album and Parable, these are not things that I think are just vital listens that you need to check in with regularly. So I've got Lateralus collecting dust. What do you got?
I love when you surprise us. I love when you keep us on our toes.
Yeah.
It's on the turntable, man. And this is a pretty easy choice for me. I mean, I think that while they've put out some really important work in their entire catalog, I think this is their best record top to bottom. I think it was extremely ambitious. And perhaps, with any band in kind of the history of rock, you got to put it up there in terms of its ambition and in terms of its signaling that this is a band that's really evolving to a unique point. And I just love albums like that. I wish there wasn't the noise junk tracks and all those type of things. And, maybe it didn't have to be 79 minutes long all in all. So I don't think it's perfect, but it's on the turntable. There are too many strong points here. There are too many adventures here to be anything but, in my opinion. So it's an important band. And I think it's not just the most important record from said band, but I also think it's top to bottom their best. There are moments on any Tool album where you have ebbs and flows, but this one top to bottom, I think demonstrates, a certain amount of strength that was very special and unique at the time. And even 20 years later, you can go for quite a ride as you knife through these songs and in many cases still try 20 years later to figure them out. All right, Nub, let's wrap this up, baby, with a little bit of in your head. They are fighting. Nub, what do you got, buddy?
I played a little golf yesterday and I had, my playlist going. So I'm just going to choose 3 songs that came on while I was golfing. I had good golf songs here. One first is
how did you hit them, buddy? Did you hit them long and straight?
No. Well, I hit them okay. I couldn't putt. Just horrible putting.
Yeah.
Terrible. But the high point of the round was probably these songs, which was first was off an album called 1984. And the song is I'll Wait by, of course, Van Halen.
Yeah. Beauty.
One of our favorite Van Halen
I remember
songs.
we both put that when we did the Van Halen top 5 in the 5150 episode. I remember we both kind of unexpectedly put I'll Wait in our top 5s.
Agreed. I was a little surprised that you liked that one as much as I did. So second would be off the album Navy Blues, the song Chester the Molester by Sloan. And third would be, totally. And then third would be Ashes to Ashes by Faith No More. I remember hitting a good shot when that song was in my ear. So. T, what is in your head?
3 good choices, buddy. Hey, the first one for me is by a guy named Robert Palmer. And
Robert Palmer, T.
We all know Robert Palmer, right? Yeah, exactly. Good Patrick Bateman there. It reminded me, I forgot that Robert Palmer died. Like, was it like 10 years ago, 15 years ago? Just like had a heart attack.
Suddenly, yeah.
Really sad. Was he cool? I need to go back and revisit some Robert Palmer interviews.
Was he cool? Oh my, he was like the coolest guy in the world.
Was he? Oh yeah.
First of all, you probably don't realize he's British. A lot of people thought he was American because of the way he broke. And he is like the smoothest cat. You know, he's exactly what you would want from Robert Palmer. You should definitely look up some interviews. He's an awesome guy. Yeah, I will.
That's good to hear. Cause I mean, all the stuff with like the power station and then the stuff with like the gals in the video.
I know.
You know, like you could tell that he was being funny. Like you could tell that he was like, it was a bit of a shtick, right? I mean, this was not, I don't think he was.
He was into the ladies. I mean, his early albums, you know, yeah.
But
have you ever heard his early work? Like Sneaking Sally Through the Alley is one of his first albums. His early work is funky as hell. I mean,
Looking for Clues. I mean,
Clues is a masterpiece for sure. But even before Clues, yeah.
Well, this is one of his pop songs from the 80s. This is called Hyperactive. It's
I know. Yeah, that one's good. Yeah.
We're going into Hyperactive. Do you think Bill Pullman do you think he lost his line on that, or do you think he meant to say hyperactive?
The half smile afterwards would signify that was ad-libbed.
I think he flubbed his line and they left it in there personally.
I think so. And he get the half smile afterwards is just, it's like one of the best parts.
It would have been kind of a Mel Brooks move to just leave it in there after he screwed it up.
Yeah,
right?
Totally.
The second is a new track from obviously one of my favorite bands, and a band we've talked about a little bit, and that's Starflyer 59. And they just put out a single called Life in Bed, which is pretty good. And the third, go back to the 80s a little bit. This is a song by Stacy Lattisaw called Let Me Be Your Angel. And
that's such a Toph pick.
Let me be your angel. I mean, it's make you cry if you're not careful. You know,
that one probably came right after the Vitamin C, the graduation song.
Hey, listen,
you love that one.
You can trash a lot of bands out there, but don't be trashing Vitamin C. All right.
Yeah.
Nubs, good stuff, buddy. It probably took us longer than we thought to talk about this band, but really a cool album to get your take on, and enjoyed it.
Absolutely. I'm going to get back to my mathematics. And I'll tell you what, T, that was episode 51, right? Episode 52. You better get your legs trained because we're going to be running up that hill here on episode 52. So get ready. Get ready.
Spoiler alert. All right. Well, before we run up that hill, we will just walk away from episode 51, where we talked about Tool's Lateralus, and hopefully your heads out there haven't exploded too hard, because sometimes this band can do it to you, but hopefully your heads are intact. I know that ours are somewhat, and we will see you next week for episode 52 on Two Twins and an album. Y'all take care.
Two twins.
Well, that's about it. That's all we have. I hope it wasn't too disappointing. We will see you on tour. Until then, take it easy.